We were leaving Camp Marina at Sault Ste. Marie, where we had celebrated the 4th of July holiday and conveniently seeing the city's spectacular fireworks display from the dock. Visited with our many close boating friends who happened to stay at camp as well. Enjoyed walking up to the city's many important historical sites and buildings, and simply just enjoyed being back at the America's Suits-friendly marina. As planned, we were underway at 8:30 and now headed south in the shipping channel in the direction of the lower lakes and Mackinac Island.
Today we're riding the river. That's the St. Mary's River between Canada and the U.S. We are between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. We got 45 miles to go down the river, and we have a good current behind us, so maybe about 1.5 to 2 knots. So right now we're going about 6 knots, but our speed over ground is about 8. So we're making good time. We expect to be there late in the afternoon. It's a very busy waterway. We'll see a lot of freighters probably along the way. We always do.
The St. Mary's River is scenic and fun to go down, but it takes a lot of concentration.
Vicky isn't kidding when she says the St. Mary's River takes a lot of concentration. The river may seem comfortably broad, but it really isn't. Most of the navigable channel is only about 300 feet wide, and some of the areas outside of the buoys are extremely shallow. So, you have to stay within the channel, often while you're up close and personal with the huge freighters. You're literally spending a day carefully going from one buoy or day marker to another.
This is a split between the upbound and a downbound channel, so that's the reason why we have to go to starboard.
The only time the commercial shipping is separated into upbound and downbound shipping channels is around the Beach Island. The recreational vessels are not bound to follow the freighter's formal separation scheme, but we have found that it's usually best to do it. If you don't, you might have a freighter coming right at you in a very narrow section of the river, and dodging a large oncoming freighter is something I like to avoid. Of course, if you have AIS, you can somewhat estimate when you might need one of them, but I still prefer to go along with the commercial separation scheme. We followed the downbound channel into the mile-long rock cut. It is one of the narrowest sections of the waterway, and my camera's wide-angle lens actually makes it look much wider than it actually is. And because the channel is so constricted, the current here is considerable, often running about 1.5 knots. If you wonder, the rock cut was carved out of limestone. The channel first opened for traffic back in 1909 and was later deepened in the early 1930s to accommodate the larger ships. It's quite an impressive piece of engineering. At 10:45, we were clear of the rock cut and followed the well-marked channel past a small anchorage and then into the large lake that is below Beach Island. A little more than an hour afterwards, we came to where the two channels once more come together. Everything was routine. Most of the time we were running on the autopilot. There were, as always, some sports fishing boats around to watch out for, but we know that we hadn't seen any freighters. There just wasn't any commercial traffic on the river on this particular day. It was very unusual. We normally meet at least 3 or 4 when we come through here.
The clouds are getting darker at the bottom, so...
Yeah, this is not a great sunny sailing day, is it? No, it's disappointing.
It's actually a motor day.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you're in the river, it's generally always a motor day.
We turned the sharp corner at the end of the lake and set a course towards a picturesque round island. There's been a lighthouse there since 1892, but the actual light was long ago moved to a steel post by the dock. The charming property is in private hands, and the lighthouse has been beautifully restored and updated. By the way, the buildings used to be white, but the color was recently changed to gray. I have to say that they were even more striking when they were white. Next up was passing Lime Island, which is adjacent to Round Island. It used to be a very busy refueling port for the freighters, but it became obsolete. It is now a state of Michigan recreational area with historic sites, cottages, campsites, trails, and boat dockage. It's supposed to be a fun place to visit, but we have always bypassed it, mainly because we like to use other harbors and anchorages at the southern end of the St. Mary's River. We were now a little more than an hour away from the day's destination, which was the marina at DeTour Village. It had indeed been a quick ride down the river towards Lake Huron, and except for this mortal freighter, there had been no large ships in sight. However, there was one other ship-related sighting. This whimsical cottage would consist of the front end of a laker, which is placed in the woods above the river. Rounding and buoying and turning into a side channel, we now headed toward the DeTour Passage and the friendly municipal marina where we had advanced dock reservations. The marina is primarily a transient facility. Out of 64 slips, 50 is set aside for transient boats. It's a lot, but the reason is that it's a key jumping off point for the recreational boats going to the North Channel of Lake Huron. It's usually a bustling place, but this time it wasn't. We figured that the pandemic-related travel restrictions to Canada were mainly to blame. It didn't take long for us to get Freelance squared away in our assigned dock space and check in with a helpful staff in the marina's office. The heavy overcast had gradually faded away, and the sun came out, making for a both peaceful and beautiful evening. We were underway early the next morning. The weather was pleasant but slightly chilly. Vicky was at the helm and headed Freelance south into the final stretch of the DeTour Passage. The river quickly carried us into the next great lake, which is Lake Huron. And once we were into Huron, there was only about 30 nautical miles to Mackinac Island. We soon got to the DeTour Lighthouse, where we would make our westerly turn. It was built in 1931 on a shoal at the southern approach to the St. Mary's River, about a mile from shore. It has an unusual boxy appearance, and certainly is not one of the more charming lighthouse designs. But in my opinion, the structure looks like it might have been inspired by the famous lighthouse of Alexandria, which was counted as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. That 350-foot tall lighthouse was, of course, a far more imposing structure than the DeTour Light, which is only 83 feet tall.
Five knots of wind. We can't do much about that. So we have to run the engine today. And this is the day when we are on our way from DeTour at the St. Mary's River to Mackinac Island, the famous Mackinac Island, which we have gone to quite a few times and really like. We'll be there around 1 o'clock, I guess. Disappointing with the light air. It's 5 knots of wind. Isn't gonna get us there. So we're running the diesel, unfortunately. Not much to do about it, but just enjoy the day on the water. And it is a beautiful day on the water.
Hal, our autopilot, was steering us towards our destination, right on the route that I had pre-programmed into our Rainbow Champion. It was all very effortless, except of course we still had to keep it from looking. The only real hazard on the track between the DeTour Passage and Mackinac Island is a 5-mile-long string of small islands and reefs that extend out from the snows towards the southeast. At the end of the string is Martin Reef, which is marked by another white and angular lighthouse. This rocky reef is listed as having a depth of only 1 foot, so Martin Reef is definitely something to stay well away from. And
getting a few splashes on the foredeck now. After having run basically nearly all the way from DeTour without any wind, completely flat. Now we got 14, 15 knots of wind right on the nose, of course, the way things are going. Sea state is now about 3 feet. It's not terrible. I mean, this is nothing that our boat can handle very easily, but it slows it down a little bit. But we're only about 45 minutes away from Mackinac, and there's no real point in putting up the sails this late in the game after being on the way for about 4 hours. Looking forward to getting in. We're just going to keep on going on the motor, and when we get into the harbor from this wind direction, it should be pretty well protected, so there shouldn't be any problem about getting in there. But it could have held off for another hour, couldn't it?
After about a half an hour more of bashing to windward, we were closing in on Mackinac Island, so we started to prepare for coming into the familiar harbor. The wind had stayed about the same, but the sea smoothed out some, probably due to getting into the lee of the land. I would like to mention that Mackinac Island's name derives from the Ojibwe word meaning great turtle. And you can see that from this direction, the island's profile does indeed resemble a giant turtle. The historic island is right before the Straits of Mackinac, where Lake Michigan flows into Lake Huron. In the past, many important historical events have taken place here, including several battles. Today, it's a hugely popular tourist destination, and for very good reasons. So much going on here. Many great restaurants and lodges, the famous fudge, of course, and also much natural beauty. However, there's one thing that's truly special about this island. The banned motor carriages back in 1898. So except for a few emergency vehicles, all transportation on Mackinac Island is done with horses and bicycles. It might seem strange, but you can often smell the multitude of horses well before you get to the island. It didn't happen this time. The wind was just too strong. When Vicky and I have cruised to Mackinac before, the marina has always been filled to capacity. And I've even been here to pick up a racing boat after a Chicago to Mac race for delivery down Lake Michigan. And at that time, the huge racing fleet was unbelievably squeezed into the small marina. After all the slips were filled, The harbor master completely packed the inner basin with rafted up racing yachts. You could literally walk from the outer pier all the way to shore on the rafted boats just by going from deck to deck. Knowing what this popular marina is usually like, we had made our slip reservations months in advance. So it was a real surprise there were so many empty slips in the marina. It just wasn't normal. We spent the next few days having fun on the island. The fast ferries kept coming and going, bringing a great many people of all ages to and from Mackinac City and St. Ignace. For sure, Mackinac is quite a popular and historic tourist destination with its many attractions, its famous fudge and its historic buildings. The horse-drawn mass traffic is also quite unique. Anyway, we have been here so many times that we mainly stayed around the marina, where we again enjoyed visiting with our cruising friends Rob and Kelly, who had come in on their 40-foot Hunter, the SV Wind Shadow. They had met up with us a few days earlier at Sault Ste. Marie, where they had helped us find a place to refill one of our propane tanks. The old fort dominates the harbor. We walked along the steep cliff up to the entrance. It's quite an impressive defensive setup on this side of the fort, but not so much along its northern perimeter. In one of the earliest engagements of the War of 1812, the unprepared fort quickly surrendered to the British. 2 years later, there was an American attempt to retake the fort, but it failed. Eventually, the peace treaty after the war returned the strategic island to the United States. It's always a real treat to visit the fort and imagine what life was like for the garrison and its families in the times gone by.
On Mackinac Island, there's so much more to see than the fort. There are stately private homes, posh hotels, and all kinds of great shopping opportunities. The fudge shops were, as usual, doing a brisk business. There is also a well-stocked grocery store for reprovisioning, and there's so many great restaurants to pick from. Our favorite lunch place happens to be on the fort's terrace. It's run by the Grand Hotel, and the view over the harbor and town is spectacular. When we wanted to take a break from the hustle and bustle of the tourists, we just went back on board the boat where we could relax, read books, or see the shore activities from our cockpit. Most of our meals were on our boat, however, we did eat out a fair amount. It was a really fun time to be back on Mackinac Island.
Thanks for watching our video to the end, and please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and also leave a comment.
It's a lot of ferry traffic, isn't it? Here comes the wake.